Good morning. You're listening to The Brief Wake Up, your mindful start to the day. I am Handel, your daily coffee companion, helping you wake up informed, thoughtful, and maybe just a little amused before the day gets old. If you're commuting, corralling kids, or just standing in line for caffeine, you're in the right place. Let's get you caught up. For health, let's talk about fiber. Not sexy, not trending in supplement ads, but quietly one of the most powerful metabolic tools we have. There's a term floating around online called fibermaxxing. It sounds ridiculous, but the science behind it, extremely solid. The average American eats about 15 grams of fiber per day. The evidence-based target is closer to 25 to 38 grams, and many long-term mortality studies show benefits climbing even into the 40-gram range. So what does fiber actually do? Soluble fiber, like oats, chia, lentils, psyllium, forms a gel in the gut. That gel binds bile acids, lowers LDL cholesterol, slows glucose absorption, flattens insulin spikes. Psyllium alone can drop LDL by 5 to 10%. Insoluble fiber adds bulk and improves colonic transit. That matters for bowel health, but also for lowering colorectal cancer risk. And then there's fermentable fiber, the microbiome angle. Your gut bacteria convert certain fibers into short-chain fatty acids, like butyrate. Butyrate is anti-inflammatory. It fuels colon cells. It influences immune signaling. This is not fringe biology. This is core physiology. Higher fiber intake is associated with lower cardiovascular disease, lower type 2 diabetes, lower colorectal cancer, and lower all-cause mortality. Now here's the key. You don't fiber max overnight. If you jump from 15 grams to 50 grams in a day, you'll feel like you swallowed a balloon. The microbiome needs time to adapt. Increase slowly. Hydrate aggressively. Spread it across meals. And you don't need powders if you don't want them. 2 tablespoons of chia seeds, 10 grams. A cup of black beans, 15 grams. A cup of raspberries, 8 grams. 1 avocado, about 10 grams. You can hit 40 grams before dinner if you plan it. In a world obsessed with biohacks and exotic supplements, fiber might be the most boring intervention with the strongest mortality data behind it. Sometimes optimization isn't complicated. It's just beans. The news is next. In news segment today, let's talk about tariffs, specifically with the renewed push for broad tariffs on imported goods. At its core, a tariff is simple. It's a tax on imports. The company bringing the product into the United States pays it. But economically, that cost rarely stays there. It gets passed down the chain to wholesalers, retailers, and ultimately consumers. So first impact, let's look at prices. When you tariff cars, electronics, steel, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, input costs rise. In the 2018 to 2020 tariff rounds, multiple economic analyses showed that most of the cost burden was absorbed domestically, not by foreign exporters. That means higher prices here at home. Second, likely retaliation. Trade policy is rarely unilateral in effect. When the US imposes tariffs, other countries typically respond. During the previous cycle, China retaliated against American agriculture. The EU targeted politically symbolic exports, so tariffs designed to protect one sector can end up pressuring another. Third is supply chains. Modern manufacturing is globally integrated. An American-made vehicle often contains components from 5 or 6 countries. Tariffs on steel or microchips don't just hit foreign producers. They increase costs for domestic manufacturers. That can compress margins, reduce competitiveness, and in some cases discourage expansion. Fourth is the growth-inflation tension. Tariffs are inherently inflationary. They raise prices. But if retaliation reduces exports and investment slows because of policy uncertainty, growth can soften. That combination, slower growth with higher prices, is the economic environment central banks hate most. Now, to be fair, supporters argue tariffs are leverage. They argue you need pressure to renegotiate trade agreements, protect strategic industries, and reduce dependence on geopolitical rivals. And in certain sectors, semiconductors, rare earth minerals, defense materials, targeted trade policy can be part of a broader industrial strategy. The key distinction is targeted versus broad, surgical versus sweeping. History shows that broad tariffs rarely shrink overall trade deficits. Trade flows simply shift. Imports move from one country to another. The underlying macro forces, savings rates, fiscal deficits, currency valuation, still drive the bigger picture. So what's the takeaway? Tariffs are not inherently irrational. They are tools, but they are blunt tools. They redistribute costs across the economy, and the trade-offs are real. Higher consumer prices, retaliation risk, supply chain friction, and potential growth drag. The question isn't whether tariffs work. The question is, work for what objective and at what cost? Tech and culture is next. Did we fake the moon landing? Let's put this one to bed. The idea that we didn't land on the moon, that it was staged, filmed on a soundstage, Cold War propaganda, persists in corners of the internet. But here's the problem with that theory. It collapses under physics, telemetry, and independent verification. First, we have current orbital imagery. Since 2009, NASA has had the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter circling the moon. It has photographed every Apollo landing site at high resolution, not just once, but repeatedly over the last decade and a half. What do those images show? They show the descent stages of the lunar module still sitting on the surface. They show rover tracks. They show astronaut walking paths radiating out from the landing sites. At the Apollo 11 site, you can see the descent stage exactly where it landed in July 1969. At Apollo 15 and 17, you can see the lunar rover tracks, long arcs across the regolith that have not been erased, because the moon has no atmosphere, no wind, no rain, no weathering, no erosion. But here's what really ends the debate. It's not just NASA imaging NASA's hardware. India's space agency, through Chandrayaan-2, independently imaged the Apollo 11 and 12 sites. Completely separate nation, completely separate mission. Same result, hardware present, exactly where the mission said they were. To believe the hoax theory, you'd have to believe. The US faked 6 separate landings. The Soviet Union, our Cold War adversary, tracked the missions in real time and never exposed a fraud. Thousands of engineers, scientists, contractors, radio operators, and international tracking stations all stayed silent for 50+ years. Independent modern orbiters from other countries are now somehow in on it. That's not skepticism. That's exponential conspiracy. And then there's physics. The retroreflectors placed on the moon during Apollo are still used today. Scientists fire lasers from Earth, and they bounce off those reflectors. We measure the Earth-Moon distance to millimeter precision. You cannot bounce lasers off equipment that isn't there. Culturally, the moon hoax theory is interesting, not because it's credible, but because it reflects something deeper. Distrust of institutions in the post-Watergate, post-Iraq War, post-social media era. But skepticism must be proportional to evidence. And in this case, the evidence is overwhelming, multi-layered, international, and still observable in 2026. The moon landing wasn't filmed in a warehouse. It's still sitting there. The lighter roast is next. Let's talk about work besties. Not regular friends. Work besties. The person who knows your coffee order, your stress tells, your passive-aggressive email tone. The one who makes eye contact with you in a meeting when someone says something unhinged. The one you text from the same room. You say things like, "If you leave, I'm leaving." And then they leave, and you stay. And somehow, you never see each other again. What happened? Nothing dramatic. No betrayal. No argument. No falling out. You just stopped sharing fluorescent lighting. Work friendships are built on proximity and pressure. You survive the same chaos, the same deadlines, the same 4:57 p.m. email that ruins your evening. You debrief everything. You replay conversations like game film. You have shared villains, shared eye rolls, shared cortisol spikes. That accelerates bonding. It feels deep because it's intense, but it's also structured. You don't have to plan it. You just show up and they're there. Then one of you leaves, or the project ends, and suddenly the relationship requires effort. Now it's, "We should grab dinner." Yes, absolutely. Let me check my calendar. And that's when adult life steps in like a bouncer. Kids, spouses, fatigue, real friends from before the job, the gym you keep canceling, the book you're pretending to read. And slowly you realize, maybe you weren't soulmates. Maybe you were battlefield allies. There's something powerful about surviving stress together. But stress is the glue. Remove the glue, and you're just two people who used to share a printer. Now here's the twist. That doesn't mean it wasn't real. Some relationships are meant to exist in a specific season, a specific building, a specific version of you. They don't need to survive brunch to have mattered. And every once in a while, one does survive. And that's how you know it was friendship. Not just shared Wi-Fi and trauma bonding. The rest, they were beautiful. They were efficient. Our commemoration is next. February 25th carries a quiet but powerful thread through history, courage, legitimacy, and cultural turning points. In 1964, a 22-year-old named Muhammad Ali, then still Cassius Clay, shocked the world by defeating Sonny Liston to become heavyweight champion. That wasn't just a boxing upset. It was the arrival of a figure who would redefine what it meant to be an athlete in public life, blending sport, civil rights, faith, and conviction in a way that forced the world to pay attention. On this day in 1870, Hiram Rhodes Revels was sworn in as the first African-American U.S. Senator during Reconstruction. In a nation still raw from Civil War, that moment carried enormous symbolic weight, progress emerging in unstable times. February 25th is also Estonia's Independence Day, marking its 1918 declaration of sovereignty amid the collapse of empires. A reminder that legitimacy often begins with a bold declaration before the world fully believes it. And then, in a very different category of history, today is National Clam Chowder Day. Because even on days marked by revolutions, champions, and political milestones, someone somewhere decided what we really needed was soup. And maybe that's the balance of it. History shakes the world, and then we sit down and eat. History reminds us that legitimacy is rarely handed over quietly. It's declared, defended, and sometimes fought for under bright lights. Whether in a boxing ring, a Senate chamber, or a young nation staking its claim, courage tends to arrive before consensus. And after the noise settles, we gather, we eat. and we remember that even world-shifting days still end in something deeply human. This is Dr. Robinson for the Brief Wake Up. Stay calm, kind, and curious. We will catch you next time.